Hello everybody, welcome to my review of Don't Nod's latest game, Tell Me Why, Episode 3. Now just a quick recap, Episode 1 I thought was a solid introduction. It got me really interested in the characters. It was good. It was a good hook, good enough that it kept me wanting to watch, but it could have been a lot better. It had some really slow moments. Episode 2 was very intense. It gave me a lot more plot, just a notch above episode 1, so I was very curious to see how is this series going to end. Is it going to be kind of flat? Is it going to be a disappointment? Is it going to be fantastic like the end of season 1? And I have to say, it was pretty damn near close to the fantastic level. It was really, really good. Not perfect, but we'll get into that in more detail. I really liked this episode. Now, why in particular? I think the best thing to do is start at the very beginning. We have, of course, the recap of the episode, which is done in that goblin animation style, perfectly fine. And then we have a really chilling dream sequence. Don't Nod has some of the best dream sequences I've seen in video games ever. You have full freedom to just do whatever you want. You can tell it's such great visual storytelling in a dream because there's no limitation of the physical world. You can have, that scene where, going back to another season, but that scene in Before the Storm where Rachel puts her hand on the window and then her hand lights on fire, and her whole body lights on fire, and then there's like ravens flying around. All that stuff you couldn't do unless you were in a dream sequence. So I can see why they like to focus on that. And in this, we have a dream sequence where Allison wakes up. Allison, voiced by Erica Lindbeck, who's just incredible in this episode. But Allison wakes up in her bed, and then it's revealed she's in this very blank, empty area of ice, I guess. She sort of gets up, she sees her mom in a coat, dropping letters, dropping papers as she walks off, and then we see Allison pick up the picture and it says, "You killed me," which of course is like the whole theme of this episode, is I'm trying to figure out what exactly happened with Marianne. Allison basically killed her in self-defense, and so it's something she's been really bottling inside, and she picks up this letter, says, "You killed me," and the way that Marianne says it, the way they distort her voice, was just incredibly chilling. And then the chord that played, such a fantastic dream sequence, and it ends with her turning around and Tyler is there and he says, "You killed me," which I guess in her mind she feels like she wronged Tyler. Allison feels like she wronged Tyler almost in the same way by keeping him from being able to have closure and being able to see what happened because she withheld her memories, and also letting him take the blame for the murder, which led to a whole slew of issues in his childhood. And luckily the suspense didn't stop there. It's not like, all right, we got you hooked, and now we're gonna give you all this exposition in a slow moving pace. She wakes up from her dream, she has to get some paperwork together to get into her apartment. And throughout the whole sequence, as the character, you're playing as Allison for the whole first half of the episode. You have to get this paperwork and these pay stubs and, the things you need to get an apartment. As she's collecting these things, your character is kind of stopped by a vision of one of the characters in the game pointing out all her deepest insecurities and then sort of going away as she tries to block it out. That's another theme of this episode, representation of mental illness. And as I was watching, I realized this was kind of emblematic of what people as extreme as people who suffer with schizophrenic disorders deal with, right? Having audible voices in their heads telling them their deepest insecurities and negativities. I thought it was really emblematic of that, even though in the story it was just like her superpower was taking over, but I thought it was emblematic of a disorder like that. And there's a good question to be asked as to whether or not it was too representative. Was it too close to home to the point where there really should have been a trigger warning at the beginning of the episode saying this really deals with mental illness in a very real way? And I would say that would have been nice for sure, having not just a trigger warning, but even some resources. I mean, this episode dealt with a lot of mental illnesses. You had analogies of schizophrenia, you also had panic disorder, which we'll get into later, suicidal thoughts and depression, alcoholism with Sam, grief as well. Grief is talked about, especially in that speech at the end. So there's a lot of mental illness representation here. I do give kudos to Don't Nod for being bold and for showing that representation there. And as someone who does deal with panic and had dealt with depression at one point earlier in my life, I do appreciate it, but there were times where I felt, wow, this actually is really close to home. Didn't, for me, overall take away from the experience. That was my impression. But anyway, let's talk about the actual story of this episode. And I have to say, Don't Nod, again, with the visual storytelling, they just kill it. And not just visual, but even the music. They kind of have to go hand in hand. The direction and cinematography and the tone of this episode was so spot on, and it was just incredible and firing on all cylinders in the whole first half of this episode. The scene where Allison breaks down with Michael, I thought was just an incredible scene. The choice to have the camera so close to her face in those moments it showed that this is hands down the episode with the closest character connection of any of the episodes so far, of either of the episodes so far. That's just what I felt about the whole first half of the episode. And we get into when she goes to the police station to talk to Tina and to Eddie, and she has that panic attack, which, say what you will about whether it's too close to home, but the visual storytelling, how the camera went to her face and then to the hand, the way the camera just had these close-ups and had like a really quick juxtaposition between her face and the stimulus, and it was trying to portray stimulation overload, and it did that in a really clever way, in a very well-directed way. The first half had great character connection. I was in Allison's head. I experienced what she was experiencing. And also one of the best scenes in the episode was when she made the confession to Eddie. If you didn't confess to Eddie, if that wasn't the choice you made, I recommend you go back and do that, because the cinematography and the music for that was incredible. It worked with the scene with Sam as well. I just loved how this episode really got me to see Sam from a different perspective. Sam was kind of portrayed as a little bit of a dodo in the first two episodes, and this episode completely changed that. Sam was so multi-dimensional in this episode. We found out so much more about him. We deeply felt sorry for him. The scene where Allison and Sam are looking at old pictures of Marianne and was just so real and so connected. Now the question is, when did the episode become less interesting? Well, for me, when you start playing as Tyler, the momentum sort of stopped a little bit. And I want to talk about Michael and Tyler. I love the representation, first of all. It shows a shift in our culture. And if you remember my review of episode 2, I said I wasn't super connected with the relationship. I felt like it moved too fast. It didn't seem very authentic. I didn't see the texture of the relationship building. It might be a personal thing. It might just be because they're both so dry, Michael and Tyler, which makes sense. They both had a rough experience growing up. It makes sense that they would be that way. But maybe it's because of my personal experience. When I love someone, I'm more energetic. I'm more kind of a goofball, and it's just my personality is different. I just didn't see the excitement they had for each other. I did select to make a move when you had a choice to either make a move or don't make a move. I made the move. They kissed, they had their cute scene. Where I really actually do feel like the game sort of objectively starts to falter is where we get to the loft. There's just kind of a few problems with this. So they get to the loft, and there's this whole slew of very complicated puzzles and designs and lights and all this stuff, and it just seems hard to believe that A, it was built by Marianne, and B, that it was maintained and after all those years was still in good shape and could still be used, and there wasn't even like cobwebs or dust or anything like that in the room. It just seemed very science fiction-y, and I felt like that was the weakest part of the episode. I feel like we really slowed down, and it became exposition. It became the exposition show. I'm sure on the second or third playthrough, I'll have the patience to go through all that because I'll have all those questions. But on the first playthrough, I felt like it was really grinding to a halt so we could do all these kind of tedious puzzles. So that was the weakest part for me. But then we get to the ending of it. We go back to the pier. Allison decides we're going to finish these memories, and that's when things really pick up. So first of all, I just want to get out of the way. I was right. I predicted Tom was the villain. To be honest, I don't feel like the episode was really about who is their father. The episode was about who was Marianne. What was her intention? What was going on in her head? And why did she do what she do? Was she trying to kill Tyler? Or was Marianne trying to kill herself because she was deeply depressed and they just interrupted her? When we hear her splash into the ocean, that to me was a big moment for me, because I remember when they said that the stabbing was non-fatal, but that she died of drowning. So I thought, oh, well, what happened? Because there's also suspicion that Allison got her memories completely mixed up. And I was like, well, so what actually happened? Did she die of drowning, or did she die of stabbing? And when it was revealed, okay, she got stabbed and then she passed out and fell into the ocean, and that's when she drowned. I was like, oh, the light bulb went off in my head. Oh, that's what happened. And so finally, the last thing I want to talk about is the choice that we had to make between choosing which reality you want to go with. Kind of reminiscent of Before the Storm, where you had to kind of choose what to tell Rachel. I chose the one where she was depressed and she killed herself. And it looked like about 2/3 of players picked that. That's kind of what all the evidence was pointing to. Although that is more harmful to your mental health, because now you have to accept that you killed someone who wasn't actually it wasn't self-defense. It was perceived self-defense, but it wasn't actual self-defense, and that can be really hard to grieve through. So I can see why someone might have wanted to choose let's just say she was totally violent and wanted to kill Tyler. Then it's kind of easier to deal with. A few other things I just wanted to cover. I think Michael's best scene was actually when he was comforting Allison when she was having her panic attack. I thought that was a great example of how to be just a good listener, a good ally for someone going through that. It was a good representation for what to do if you're in that situation where you're in the room where someone is having a panic attack, and maybe you're the only person in the room, and it's on you to kind of make them feel better. I thought that was a good moment. I do ultimately feel like you would not lose a whole lot if you got rid of these psychic abilities. I think maybe it made some things easier, but it would have been more realistic, more grounded if they did not have that science fiction-y element to it. You know, like with the last choice of choose your memory, you didn't necessarily have to have literal sparkly memories there. You could have just had them envisioning it in their heads, and you can have that portrayed cinematically. I don't think you lose a lot narratively by losing the science fiction element, the psychic stuff. I think I covered basically everything I wanted to say. I just wanted to give you guys my authentic, off-the-cuff thoughts on the episode. I think the episode was extremely strong. Great character connection, like I said. Very good cinematic storytelling. It's just everything great I love in a Don't Nod game. Riveting plot twists and story. Overall, I think the game is great. I recommend it. I think it has good replay value. I'll replay it again in the future and maybe delve a little deeper into the characters. Thank you for those of you who have watched my review so far. I like to continue this train and keep it going of Don't Nod related reviews. I got a lot of reviews to do because there's so many different games I can review, but what I actually want to start with is I'd like to get into these things. I'd like to review the comic books because I don't see a lot of these reviews on YouTube, and I'd like to change that. And I'd like to review these and lead up to what's coming out in October, which is the second series of comic books called Partners in Time. So that's what I like to do. I'd also like to review the original Life is Strange games at some point. If you really are interested in that, click that subscribe button down below and you'll see all those reviews. Join this community, join the discussions. Click that like button if you enjoyed the video. And with that, I recommend you play Tell Me Why, and I'll see you next week.